From the gridiron to the hardwood, James Mesh breaks it all down. It's time for another episode of Cleats and Sneaks.
We haven't even gotten into week 5 yet, and there's already big talks of blockbuster trades. Welcome into another edition of Cleats and Sneaks, the podcast where we're talking everything big and what's going on with the NFL and the NBA. And really, for the most part, I'd get into week 5, and we can get into that a little bit later and kind of recap what had happened in week 4. But I want to talk about a couple of trades, one of them that went down in the NBA and one that could hypothetically be happening soon in the NFL. We'll start off with the NBA and knock this one out since this had already happened previously last week. Karl-Anthony Towns, he ends up getting traded from the Minnesota Timberwolves to the New York Knicks, already breaking up the Nova Knicks. That thing lasted about a month, 2 months. That didn't last very long. But what I'm really curious to see is what happens and who actually wins this trade. Because you kind of look at Karl-Anthony Towns, the best shooting big in the NBA right now. You kind of look at what had happened in his time in Minnesota. Initially was kind of supposed to be that savior and the player to take the Timberwolves to that next level, kind of try and be a playoff team and see if they could be a contender. Didn't really work out, but they got Anthony Edwards, and really it was good of him to be selfless, being a former top pick to being really the number 2 role on that team and being the second option for them. And then also, whenever they traded for Rudy Gobert, it was really noble of him to even move from the 5 spot to the 4. That way, Rudy Gobert didn't lose any comfortability as he went to a different team. So those are really nice to see. And the fact that he is really good at shooting the 3 ball as well, it's a different dimension that the Knicks are going to be able to add to their repertoire, and something that they were kind of lacking last year. They had it from the guards, they had it from the wings, but they didn't really have it from the center position. So the fact that they get that new addition, it's really good to see for them. However, and then also looking at it because they also traded away Julius Randle, and he missed a majority of the season, wasn't there for the playoffs for the Knicks. It was really on Jalen Brunson's shoulders to carry the load for the most part, as well as a couple of other guys like Dante DiVincenzo and Josh Hart and company. DiVincenzo also ends up getting traded as well as a first-round pick in that deal. But the way I see it is, I'm not too sure that the Knicks are really going to be able to do much with this. I don't think this really takes them to that next level. When you look at some of the other teams, the Philadelphia 76ers, they had made trades over the offseason as well. They got Paul George. They were able to move on from a couple of guys, still have the key pieces, Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, plus Paul George to be able to add to it. That was pretty nice from them. But then you also look at the Boston Celtics, the team that just won the NBA title last year and pretty much brought everyone back. No key pieces were gone, and everyone comes back basically to reunite what had happened last year and see if they can repeat. You got a couple of big-time teams in the East that you need to look out for, and the Knicks. Good addition of getting Karl-Anthony Towns, but my big thing is the fact that the New York fan base and the media of New York, they're going to eat the guy alive. I mean, I'm not going to be surprised if we get not even halfway into the season and maybe Cat either misses time because of an injury, or maybe it's just not the best play and he's just not gelling well with guys like Josh Hart and Jalen Brunson. And there's kind of some sort, not necessarily turmoil, because Cat's not really a controversial type of guy. But if the two aren't able to connect and gel and get chemistry, and it's not leading to wins by the Knicks, or it's poor play one reason or another, or he gets injured, one of those factors could happen, and the media and the fan base of the Knicks are going to jump on him. And if you've ever seen Karl-Anthony Towns, whether it's interviews or just sound bites or just him on social media, you can just kind of tell by his personality, he's not the most aggressive in a sense. You can tell by his voice, you can tell by his mannerisms. The guy, I don't want to call him soft, but he's not that type of guy from what you see with other guys like Anthony Edwards, if you get what I'm saying. Like, I think Karl-Anthony Towns is a good player, and I think there's a solid chance that he'll be able to gel well with Jalen Brunson. But at the same time, if one or two things goes wrong and that fan base turns on him quick, I'm not too sure that Cat's going to be able to respond very well. And even then, even if we look at what's going on paper with that team, I just don't see how the Knicks, moving on from Randall, who is a really good scoring option, moving on from DiVincenzo, who was a really good three-point shooter for them, then also moving on from a draft pick, I'm not too sure the addition by subtraction, in a sense, is going to help the Knicks and elevate them over the other teams that I had brought up, plus the other teams in the East that are also going to be looking to kind of take that next step forward and challenge Boston to represent the East and even try to win an NBA title. So it was an okay trade, but I really have my questions and I have my concerns about how this is going to go down. Don't really see how the Knicks are going to be able to take that next step forward because I don't think Cat by himself with Jalen Brunson is going to be enough to take the Knicks to the promised land. But then you look at what's going on with the NFL, and it's really interesting a discussion because we've seen Davante Adams ever since he got traded from the Green Bay Packers to the Las Vegas Raiders. It's not like the production has gone down any sort of sense, if you know what I mean. He's still getting plenty of targets. He's still making a lot of catches, and he's still getting plenty of yards and touchdowns from what you had seen the first 2 years. But this year, it's a little bit different, and you can just tell that Davante has been very frustrated. The quarterback play ever since Derek Carr left, having Jimmy Garoppolo last year, plus a couple of other guys, including Aiden O'Connell, and now this year with Gardner Minshew, it's just not adequate quarterback play. And maybe he was just so used to what Derek Carr did the 1 year they were together in Vegas and then his time in Green Bay with Aaron Rodgers, as well as also having Derek Carr in college. Like, maybe he was just spoiled. Maybe he was spoiled and was just so used to having good to great quarterback play that once that he had to deal with the Joe Schmoes of Garoppolo, AOC, and Gardner Minshew. Like, I like Gardner Minshew, but he's not a guy that you can rely on consistently to be your actual starting quarterback if you want to win a bunch of games and take that next step forward, get into the playoffs, make a run, maybe make it to a Super Bowl and actually win the whole damn thing. He's just not that type of guy, unfortunately. But maybe Davante was just so used to that, and you could just see it. If you've watched Raiders games and you've watched clips of Davante, he's gotten frustrated because he gets open. It's not like the talent or the physical capability of Adams has gone down. Even if he's 31, turning 32 later in the year, he's still a guy that can get open and be productive. He just needs to be in the right situation. And that's why he has said, and it's come out publicly, that he wants to get traded. He prefers to be traded and wants to get out of Vegas. The two main destinations that he wants to go to are the New York Jets and the New Orleans Saints. I think there's pros and cons to where for both teams, really. But I'm going to focus more on the Saints since that's really the local team. And for sure, the fact that he would reunite with Derek Carr, that's really nice. I think they'd be able to gel really well since we already seen that they're basically just best buds ever since going back to their college days. I don't think you would have to really have any time to be like, hey, let's get used to one another. No. They've already done that. You also, just the fact that you would want to be able to have another receiving threat out there, that's really nice, especially since he's able to separate really well. He already has the connection with Derek Carr, and you always can go back to the cliche and the saying of you can never have enough weapons. But when I look at the way the team is constructed for the New Orleans Saints, I just don't believe that this is something that the Saints should or will do. I don't believe it. When you look at it, the Saints were trying to get a deal done with Alvin Kamara over the offseason. That didn't happen. Kamara just said, put it to a halt. We'll figure it out in the offseason. I'm worried only about the season. I'm only worried about what's going to happen in these games coming up. And And if you were to trade for a guy like Adams, that's really nice. It's a great weapon to add to your offense, and it can make it even more lethal. But at the same time, you look at what happened and the fact that the Raiders are actually asking for a second round pick. It's not bad, especially since if you look at Devontae Adams like I look at him as still one of the best receivers. The production wise, you're not seeing it, but I put that more on the quarterback play and the team itself than Devontae, because if you watch it, he's still getting open plenty of times and making plenty of separation. Just gets overthrown way too many times. I don't think Derek Carr would do that as often. But I think there's quite a few reasons, including the fact that second round pick usually would be fine for a wide receiver of that caliber. However, when I look at the New Orleans Saints, they've been able to hit really well on these day 2 picks. So having to give up a second or maybe a third and a little bit extra, or maybe even multiple thirds to kind of get the deal done, I just don't think they should do it, nor do I think they will do it, because that's just the type of situation of he wants to get out of there anyway. Plus, it really comes down to the type of cost that it would be. I think if the Saints were able to get something done differently, like if you were able to get away with a couple of day 3 picks, I'd be a little bit more on board. But not only with the draft capital sense and how much it would cost, because that's a big factor, but also at the same time, you look at what's happening with the financial part of it all. Saints only have about $3.2 million left in cap space, and Devontae Adams, his base salary to this point, through the first 4 games, over these last 13, he still needs to get paid another $13.03 or just a little bit over $13 million for the rest of the year. And so you'd have to move the money. And I just brought it up. Alvin Kamara does not want to mess with his contract. He has shut that down for the year. He said, once the season's over, we can see if we can get a deal done. But until then, I'm not looking to do anything. So you kind of shut that off the table. You've already reconstructed guys like Cam Jordan and Demario Davis multiple times. So I'm not quite sure where you're going to be able to find that extra money to be able to get it done. Maybe in the deal, you would be able to have a majority of the contract be taken up still by the Raiders. But at the same time, I'm not too sure the Raiders are actually looking to actively get rid of him for that type of price and then still have to pay for a majority of the contract. So if that's the case, the Saints would have to give up more to be able to have them take more of the financial burden. So even then, that makes even less of a sense for me, because why would you want to give up this type of draft capital when you can put it into more guys as you try to build up the team and get younger? Like, that's kind of been the thing. The Saints were older the last couple of years. They moved on from a couple guys. They've been trying to get younger. Why would you kind of ruin your chance of getting younger with these draft picks just to take an older receiver? He's still really good, but the way that the team philosophy is and the way Mickey Loomis and company are trying to build this team and trying to get younger and cheaper, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Plus, you look at what's going on with the injuries and the real team needs. A lot of people have been saying the Saints need a wide receiver, and I'm one of the guys that say, no, you don't. Do you need someone that can be able to get more one-on-one situations and get these 50-50 jump balls? Yeah, but I also think that's someone that you can rely on in A.T. Perry if he can figure it out and be more consistent, not only in practice, but on the field itself. That way he can gain more trust from that Saints coaching staff. The big thing, though, is when you bring in someone like Devontae Adams, he's also been talked about as a quote-unquote diva. And I just don't think that's the case. Again, I think that just goes back to the situation and the frustrations of you're getting open, you're winning the routes, you're winning the rep in live game action, and you're doing it pretty convincingly, but the quarterback isn't able to connect with you, and y'all just aren't able to get it done and actually make the big plays happen. Like, I just don't think that's the case. And even before then, he was never really a locker room cancer or anything like that. He just wanted to get out of there so he can go play with his buddy in Derek Carr and kind of prove himself elsewhere, because he could also just kind of tell the writing on the wall. Aaron Rodgers wanted to get out of Green Bay anyway, so he didn't want to get left in the dust. It's like, well, if you're going to leave, I don't want to have to play with a bad quarterback. I want to go play with Derek Carr. And then the Raiders kind of screw him out of it as they don't re-sign Carr and he comes to the Saints. So then the last year and so far through the first 4 games this year, Davante Adams has been like probably really frustrated with the organization itself. Like, hey, I came here for my guy and you let my guy walk. So I've kind of been screwed out of this. So I don't blame him for being frustrated for a multiple of those reasons, as well as probably other things that maybe have gone on behind closed doors that really no one knows about, and we probably won't ever know about. But also then, with what's going on, I look at the team needs. I say offensive line, defensive line, and safety are much more of a priority to help improve there to make this team better before you go get another wide receiver. Because sure, you can always go back to the cliche of, well, you can never have enough good pass catchers, especially since a couple of them are being injured. Alvin Kamara right now is dealing with multiple injuries. You don't have Kendre Miller as of yet. He's been on IR so far. Taysom Hill has now gone through multiple injuries over the last couple of weeks, and the offensive line is beat up. So you look at all of that, and it just doesn't seem like the move to go get a wide receiver that's in his early 30s, that's going to cost a lot of money, that's going to cost a fair amount of draft capital on a team that's trying to get younger, just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If we were playing fantasy or if we were doing Madden franchise mode, it's like, yeah, why not? We're the one controlling the player. That'd be awesome. Like, why not? But since we're looking at it from a real-life football perspective, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense, unfortunately. I'd love to be able to get the deal done, but the cost just doesn't seem right. The cons outweigh the pros and so many more things. Because you also look at the wide receivers in Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. Those are 2 young guys that the Saints are trying to build their offense around. You bringing in someone like Davante Adams kind of commands a good amount of targets, especially since that connection between Carr and Adams. Carr's going to want to go to Davante a lot, whether he's meaning to or not. And that could stunt the growth and the development as you're trying to get those 2 guys to be your main options. Because you're not going to have Taysom Hill much longer. You only have so much more time with Alvin Kamara because he's about to be a 30-year-old running back. And then you also are not quite sure what's going on with the tight end position because Juwan Johnson, he gets injured a lot, but he's also a converted wide receiver into a tight end. Offensive line is banged up and still needs significant improvement over these next couple of years. There's just a lot of issues that the Saints need to figure out and get fixed. And wide receiver is not one of those main issues. So for all those reasons and a little bit more, I just don't think that going to go trade for Davante Adams if you're Mickey Loomis and the New Orleans Saints, I just don't think it's something that you should do. Now, if you're the Jets, I can understand it. But I also wonder what's going to go on there because Garrett Wilson's basically Chris Olave, since they're both former Ohio State wide receivers that are young and developing and trying to be one of, if not the main piece for their respective offenses. And you also got Mike Williams over the offseason. He hasn't been all that productive, but he's also been dealing with an injury. But also you have the former Green Bay Packer Allen Lazard there, who Aaron Rodgers still likes to throw to. So it also comes down to, and you also look at what the same thing with the New Orleans Saints. You only have so many pass attempts and so many targets to get to these guys. And can you consistently satisfy all these guys without any of them getting mad or getting upset because they're not getting the ball enough? I'm not sure that you can do it, especially with a 40-year-old quarterback. So even though Davante Adams wants to go play for one of his 2 former quarterbacks, I just don't see how it makes a whole lot of sense outside of just making sure that you have another weapon on the offensive side of the football for the Jets. I think a couple of teams that feel like you should be looking out for that could make a trade that we haven't really heard from yet are 2 NFC teams. I think the Washington Commanders could be a good one, especially since Scary Terry, he's really nice, but then you also moved on from Jahan Dotson and sent him to the Eagles right before the season started. I think that would be good there, especially since you're working with a young quarterback. More secure weapons to throw to is going to help the development of Jaden Daniels. So I think that's a good one, even if Scary Terry and Davante are kind of similar in what kind of build they are as a wide receiver and what kind of archetype. But another team is the Arizona Cardinals. And that's one team that I really look out for and that I think should have a serious case in why they should go for it. Because, yes, you just drafted Marvin Harrison Jr., but at the same time, are you really trusting any of the other guys in that Arizona offense outside of Trey McBride at tight end? Like, I'm not looking at James Conner to be a consistent guy to throw to. You're also looking at some of the other running backs that they have, including the rookie that they drafted. But the wide receiver position itself, outside of Marvin Harrison Jr., Michael Wilson, he's been okay. You also look at Greg Dortch, he's been okay. They also moved on from Hollywood Brown and sent him to the Chiefs over the offseason. I think there's plenty of targets for him to go to. If Devontae were to go to Arizona, I don't think it would be much of an issue because you'd have your top 3 targets, Marvin Harrison Jr. here, Devontae Adams over here, Trey McBride at tight end, plus a solid offensive line. And I think it'd be enough targets for everyone to go to, and everyone would be happy. It would work since you are working with a pretty stable quarterback in Kyler Murray. But even then, I just think it's one of those offenses that could use a little bit extra of a boost, especially since we're talking about an NFC West division where Seahawks are 3-1. You look at the 49ers, who were supposed to be a Super Bowl contender. And even though the Rams haven't been good so far and they're dealing with a bunch of injuries themselves, that's another team that could go for it. But at the end of the day, you're just really kind of hoping for Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua to come back from their injuries, and you can kind of get back on your stride. Plus, I just don't think that they're all that desperate. But I think Arizona is kind of one of those teams where you should be able to do it. Plus, you also remember a couple of years ago, the Cardinals traded for D-Hop. Like, it's kind of like a similar type of situation, right? Like, I think that's something where you could see it, and history may be able to repeat itself. But appreciate you listening. Appreciate you tuning in to get another edition of Cleats and Sneaks. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, ESPN Southwest Louisiana. Don't forget to also check out our website, ESPNSouthwestLouisiana.com. Upload a bunch of great local content. LSU Tigers, Houston Astros, New Orleans Saints, Louisiana Raging Cajuns, McNeese Cowboys. Talk a bunch of NFL, talk a bunch of NBA, talk about the MLB playoffs. Like, we got it all. We got it all, and we're here for you. Appreciate you listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and talk to you next week.